A family is posing for professional Christmas photos in a fancy New York apartment. The man, Drew, dressed smartly and looking ready for work, questions why they're doing this in August. His wife Kate explains that they have to send out the cards in the first week of December. And they only have their son Luke for one more day before he goes off to school. Exasperated, the man lets the photographer take one more shot, then answers his phone and rushes out of the door to a work engagement, waving goodbye on his way out. Kate meets up with some of her friends downtown for lunch and discusses going back to the workforce now Luke is out of the house. They don't think much of the idea, saying she should take it easy like them. But she really loved being a vet before she quit working and wants to go back to it. She's not the type who can just sit around and do nothing. Luke is packing up the last of his things for college, and his girlfriend, who's driving him down there, is helping him carry everything out to the car. Kate forces Luke to stand by the wall so she can mark his height one last time before he leaves, and he indulges her, but is clearly bothered by her overprotectiveness and says he's never going to make it in life if he stays at home. His dad cuts in and tells Kate to let the kids get on the road, and Luke hugs him goodbye and heads downstairs after a final embrace from his mother. As soon as they're gone, Kate turns to her husband and explains that while she knows things haven't been great between them, now that it's just the two of them, she wants to work on spending more time together and trying to fix things. She has booked them a second honeymoon to Africa, a wild adventure where they can recapture their love. Drew, though, is not thrilled at her announcement, putting his head in his hands. He asks her if she's happy and says that they're not in love with each other anymore and they shouldn't pretend like it's still possible to fix. He's going to leave today. He only waited until now so he didn't upset Luke. Kate is shocked, asking if he's not even going to have a discussion. But he grabs his already packed bags and walks out, assuring her it'll be better for them both in the long run. Not sure what to do, Kate walks around the house, halfway between crying and hyperventilating. She takes her wedding ring off and takes all Drew's clothes out of the closet and leaves them on the sidewalk for someone to take for free. Then she sits at a cafe, staring at their flight tickets to Africa and the travel guide she bought for them, seeming to come to a decision. She's going to go anyway. She arrives in Zambia to a romantic honeymoon suite which only reminds her of her loneliness more. She pops open the champagne immediately. Later, she's at dinner in the restaurant and the waiter brings over the prepaid meal for two, a gigantic lobster she can't possibly finish alone. She asks for more alcohol to persevere through the evening, just as a handsome stranger walks in and greets the staff in their local language. Her eyes follow him across the room as he sits down at the bar and talks to the bartender about a poker game. He notices her looking, and intrigued, turns around to face her, so she nonchalantly pretends to read her travel guide and thanks the waiter for the extra drink, acting as though she doesn't see him. He humors her, asking her if she's studying, and then offers her an air toast from his seat when she confirms she's eating alone. He correctly guesses she's from New York, saying he could tell because she's so put together, and then notices her name card and asks if her husband is joining her. He continually asks what happened when she politely attempts to deflect his questions. Despite his good looks, she's getting a little irritated by his constant questioning about her background. So eventually she puts her travel guide down and addresses him with a full-on speech about how she put her husband through grad school, raised her kid, and now she's somehow become a lady who lunches without any real purpose in her life. She asks if he's satisfied now that he knows the full story. Unfazed, he says he only wanted to know because he wanted to see if she'd have any leftover food from the giant lobster platter, and she glares at him, gets up and storms off. The bartender chuckles and tells him he's lost his touch, but he shrugs, sits down at the now empty table, and starts eating. The next morning, Kate awakens in the rose-covered honeymoon bed and heads out to her safari. She's surprised and dismayed to find the stranger there when she arrives, and finds out that he's the pilot who flies the tours. He introduces himself as Derek, and she tells him he can call her Kate. She makes fun of the name of his plane, which is called Kirk, and he tells her that it's supposed to be named after a woman you love, and it was originally called Kira when he got it, so he just had to change the one letter. They fly over a beautiful forested valley and see a herd of buffalo. Kate's enthralled by the view, even becoming slightly less annoyed by Derek, now that he's talking about the game animals and not asking her personal questions. However, not a moment later, he takes a sharp turn and says they need to make a stop. She's confused as they land, asking what they're doing, but Derek just tells her to stay on the plane and he'll be back in a minute. She ignores him, getting out and following him through the underbrush. Quickly she catches up to him, and he motions to her to stay quiet and stick with him. They come upon a dead elephant, poached for its tusks, and a small baby beside it, lost without its mother. Derek makes a call informing local law enforcement about the poachers, then asks Kate if she wants to help. She agrees, and he takes off his jacket and asks her to take off her overshirt. He takes both garments, and while Kate walks up to the baby elephant, distracting it, he sneaks round behind it and grabs it, covering its eyes and laying it on its side so it can't attack them. It quickly grows calm under the dark blindfold, and Kate fetches water for it as Derek directs her what to do. Before long, some workers from the elephant sanctuary arrive and hoist the baby onto a truck. Kate's distraught at the baby's distress, asking what's going to happen to him. Derek calmly explains that he'll be taken to the sanctuary and looked after, and that they should get back to the plane so he can get her to the safari lodge on time. Kate refuses, though, staring desperately at the baby elephant, saying she wants to go with it. Derek is reluctant, telling her she won't be able to help, but she professes that she's a vet, and even though she hasn't practiced in a while and knows nothing about elephants, she wants to do what she can. One of the elephant handlers on the truck looks at her skeptically, but introduces himself as Jonathan and agrees to let her go with them. She's delighted and hops on board, and Derek shakes his head, surprised, because he hadn't thought Kate would be the type. It's a short journey to the sanctuary, and soon the baby elephant is lying down in the stable. Kate assists in getting a drip into his ear, hydrating him. Jonathan shrugs and says he's in shock from losing his mother, and that they'll have to wait and see if he gets up or not. He shows her around the sanctuary, explaining how things function, where they sleep, and how they reintroduce the elephants to the wild once they're grown and back to health. They put them into a pen that faces the outside and allow them to go off at their own pace when they're ready. Jonathan explains that elephants have all the same emotions as humans, including a sense of humor and an understanding of family. He introduces her to the herd, identifying each elephant and their personalities, and shows Kate where she'll be sleeping and eating. She looks around in wonder, thrilled at having found something that gives her purpose. Although her expensive holiday plans have been derailed, she's happier knowing that she's able to help these animals. She goes into her tent to find that it's actually very nice inside, with a cozy single bed, lamp, some books, and a small table. However, she quickly realizes that it's not actually her tent, when a half-naked Derek appears behind her. He tells her that he lives there full-time and sells tours to pay for his board. He's brought her things and put them in her tent down the way, but he teases her, saying he doesn't think she'll need the high heels here. She leaves, refusing to let him get a rise out of her, and encounters a well-dressed blonde lady who's about to visit Derek. Her tent is similar, and she unpacks quickly, putting a picture of Luke on her table, then heads to the large common area for dinner. Derek's already there getting his own dinner, and invites her to sit with him. She compliments the food, and he says he's glad she likes it, because they have it every day. Then he presses her about why she quit being a vet, in keeping with his habit of asking personal questions. This time, though, Kate doesn't mind answering. She says she never really meant to quit, but life just happened. She's mortified that she told him everything about herself while she was drunk the previous evening. He takes some food off her plate, and she doesn't even tell him off, aware by now that he pushes boundaries and beginning to get used to him. Derek walks her back to her tent and explains that the night watchman keeps them safe from the wildlife. He bids her goodnight. It's obvious that the two are quickly becoming friends. That night, though, Kate can't sleep, so she heads to the stable where the baby elephant is being kept so she can check on him. To her surprise, Derek is already there, sleeping with the elephants. She asks him if he's literally everywhere and he confirms it, throwing her a blanket and telling her not to walk alone out there next time because it's not super safe for a tourist. She spends the rest of the night in the stable right beside the baby elephant. In the morning, she wakes to find out that he's gotten up, and she shrieks in delight, happy that he's chosen to pull through. Derek arrives with a bottle and lets Kate feed him, then goes off to fetch more, telling her to take good care of his elephant. She calls back that it's not his elephant, it's theirs. Jonathan comes in to check on him and names him Manu, meaning second son. Kate asks about his life and he tells her he grew up on the reserve. He addresses her as Dr. Kate, and she says she really doesn't need a title, but he insists, saying that the local vet doesn't come often, so while she's there, she's Dr. Kate. Thus begins Kate's life at the elephant sanctuary. She helps to feed them, looks after the orphans, and gets involved in their lives. She mixes formula for the baby elephants and gets to know the older ones in the herd. But most of all, she takes care of Manu. One day she awakens in his stable and offers to stay while Jonathan feeds him, but he says she shouldn't because he doesn't want Manu growing too attached and missing her, since she'll be returning to the US the following day. She can't believe it's already been 2 weeks, and is saddened that she'll have to return to her old life. Derek finds her sitting alone at a table, browsing through the photos that they took the day her husband left her. He asks if she wants to go on a safari since she's leaving and she didn't get the one she paid for. They head out in a truck together, and he takes her on a wild route to the watering hole where they see dozens of animals grazing. They hop out of the truck, and Kate sees paintings and art supplies in the back. She exclaims that Derek's paintings are really good, but he's humble about it. They take a picnic blanket over to the bank and lie down on it, watching the animals drink. He says sometimes he goes there to paint, other times he just goes there to fall in love with Africa. He explains that this is where the elephants come to mingle with the wild herd, and that they'll keep socializing until, eventually, one day they just don't come back to the sanctuary. Kate asks if he ever misses them, and explains that her son just went to college so she's feeling the empty nest syndrome. Derek admits that he wanted kids at one time, but his wife died 15 years earlier, so he returned to Africa where he really feels at home. Kate laments that she doesn't know what to do with herself after she returns to New York. She calls Luke to check in on him and is happy to see he's doing well at college. At her last meal at the sanctuary, Kate cooks for everyone and makes a speech, saying that she'll never forget any of them or what they've done for her. After dinner, Derek takes her into his tent and shows her a telescope he has set up. She told him previously that Luke liked astronomy at a young age, so she has one at home, but all she can see in New York are electronic lights. She gazes up at the stars in fascination, and when she takes her eye away, Derek is right beside her. They stare into each other's eyes, knowing that she's leaving tomorrow, and this will be the last chance either one of them gets to acknowledge the feelings that have been developing between them. Derek leans in and kisses her, softly and slowly, but just as they're getting into it, someone enters the tent and interrupts them. It's the blonde woman from before. There is a strongly charged tension in the air as Derek introduces her as Leslie, one of the board members from the foundation that funds the sanctuary. She's frosty towards Kate, assuming that there's something between them. Embarrassed, Kate excuses herself to head back to her tent. Derek follows her, but she's angry, assuming that he and Leslie are involved, and tells him that she should have stuck with her first impression, that he was just a playboy who got what he wanted and didn't care about anyone else. The next day, she's preparing to leave and goes to say goodbye to Manu, but at the last minute, he hugs her with his trunk. She decides she can't go back, not when there's a baby here who needs her. Jonathan finds Derek and tells him Kate's staying because she's in love. Derek is startled, but Jonathan tells him not to flatter himself. It's not because of him, it's Manu. Kate emails Luke, letting him know she's staying in Africa a while longer. 3 months later, they're preparing for Christmas at the sanctuary, putting out decorations. Kate is still there, having learned more about elephants and become their full-time vet. Kate is sad that she won't see Luke, but she's excited to meet everyone's families. Jonathan's wife and kids introduce themselves to her. She bakes cookies with his 2 daughters, and they make 2 in the shape of her and Derek. Kate is still feeling raw about what happened between them and moves the cookies apart on the tray. Just then, Derek comes in, bringing a package. Kate has ordered a coffee maker for the sanctuary so they can all have really nice coffee. With it, though, comes the divorce papers her husband has served her. She gets upset and leaves to go find Manu. Derek follows. She says she should have seen it coming so long ago. Derek comforts her, giving her a hug, and both are still clearly feeling the connection between them. Jonathan interrupts them and Kate heads awkwardly back to camp. That night, disaster strikes as one of the bigger elephants opens the gate, and Manu follows her out. Everyone wakes up in a panic, and Kate insists that Derek take her out to look for him. He says he can't fly at night, but at her insistence, agrees to take the truck. The 2 of them head out with flashlights, driving through the plains. After a while, though, Derek stops the car and puts his hat over his face, saying they need to sleep. Kate is still distressed, but knows she can't do anything without him, so she tries to get some rest despite her worry. The next day, they are awoken by a wild elephant called Roy, who Derek rescued 10 years prior. They get a call from the camp saying there's been good news, that they have a sighting. Derek drives them right over to where Manu is, and they bring him home safe and sound. As soon as they get there, he's called over to the airstrip. Kate watches him go, her feelings for him still lingering on her mind. She helps the women cook the Christmas lunch, and Jonathan's wife teases her about her relationship with him, but she insists she and Derek are just friends. Just then, though, Jonathan appears and tells her Derek needs her at the airstrip. Kate heads over there and is overjoyed to find that Luke has flown out to spend Christmas with her. He tells her his father bought him a ticket as a surprise for her. She can't believe he's there and is more excited than ever, so pleased that he gets to see her life in Zambia. She happily introduces him to all the elephants and handlers. He comments that Derek seems nice, and she rolls her eyes. That night, they all have a big party and a feast, and Luke plays the keyboard for all the gathered families. Jonathan comments to Derek that he hasn't seen him let anyone in for a long time, and maybe he should take a chance. Derek, though, shakes his head, asserting that she'll leave one day, because they always do, and it won't be sad when it ends if it never even began. Kate takes a picture of everyone at the table, grinning and laughing, and shows it to Luke, who confirms that it's definitely nicer than the fake one they took in August. Kate and Luke sit down in her tent and he says he can see why she doesn't want to come back. He could always tell that things weren't right between her and Drew, and he's not upset that they're broken up. He's happy that she's finally found somewhere she wants to be. Kate is overwhelmed, not realizing until now how worried she was about Luke's reaction to the divorce, and thrilled that he isn't sad about her being so far away from home. She goes outside to find Derek later that night. He's painting outside his tent, and is startled when she approaches, covering it with a cloth. He invites her to sit down and share a drink with him. He says he likes her son, and he doesn't usually say that about humans. She says that Derek isn't actually as terrible as she first thought he was. Then he invites her for a kiss under the mistletoe, but she shrinks away, afraid of her own feelings, and tells him maybe next year. She heads back to her own tent, with a long look back over her shoulder, and he sighs and returns to his painting, which it turns out is of Kate. The following day, Kate is asking Luke about his time at college, but he's not forthcoming with the details, shrugging off her questions. It's clear he's not enjoying it, but he doesn't want to disappoint her. At the end of the day, though, he finds the courage to tell her that he's dropping out, that he wants to make music. Kate's shocked and tries to tell him he can't just drop out, but he stands firm, saying she took off to Africa to do what makes her happy, and he wants to follow his own dreams as well. Kate's angry and deflects Derek's attempt to comfort her later that night. cruelly saying he doesn't even have kids so he wouldn't understand. Luke leaves the following day, hugging his mom goodbye but affirming that he won't change his mind about college. After dropping him off at the airport, Derek goes to Kate's tent once again to check on her. She invites him in, apologizing for her comments the previous evening. She's packing her things and getting ready to go back to the US. Derek asks her if it's finally time, and she says she's really going. She steps up to him, eyes shining, and opens her mouth to speak. But he interrupts her, saying he's going to miss her. The unspoken feeling between them is intense, and unable to hold back anymore, Derek leans forward and kisses her tenderly. She reciprocates, and they share a gentle embrace before he leaves to go back to his tent. Leslie is waiting for him inside, and has found the painting of Kate. She flew out to surprise Derek for the holidays, but upon his return to the tent, she interrogates him about his feelings for her. Derek breaks off whatever on and off relationship they've had, saying he can't do it anymore, and in response Leslie threatens to cut funding for the sanctuary. He begs her not to, that it's about the elephants, not about them, but with tears in her eyes, she storms out. Derek is left staring at the painting of Kate. The following morning, Kate is leaving for real. Derek can't face driving her, so he lets Jonathan take her. The two of them share a long, wistful embrace before she departs, neither one willing to acknowledge that they've fallen in love. He calls out after her that he'll be there if she decides to come back. He watches her, brokenhearted, as Jonathan drives away, chiding himself for getting so attached to someone he knew would only leave him. Back in New York, Kate gets a job with a local veterinary firm and convinces Luke to go back to college, but to study music this time. She meets up with Drew and gets him to agree to the idea, professing that Luke will never turn out to be like him, that they just have to do their best to help him be himself. Drew, impressed with the new Kate, asks her if she met someone in Africa, and she confirms that she did. She met herself. On New Year's, Kate calls Jonathan, who sadly explains to her about the sanctuary's funding situation. Determined that she can't let it happen, Kate sells a lot of her expensive clothes and jewelry, speaks to her friends and Drew, and goes on a fundraising campaign to raise the money they need. Derek receives all the checks by mail and knows that Kate is still doing her best to help them, even though she's far away. He begins to have hope again and sends her the painting that's now finished. She stares at it longingly, noticing Derek's signature at the bottom. The following year, things return to normal. Derek is picking up tourists in his plane, which has been freshly painted and is now named Kate. Meanwhile, Kate is working at her new job in the vet surgery in New York. She's treating dogs with nail clippings and antidepressants, and slowly coming to realize that it's not enough for her anymore, that she wants to make a difference. Derek heads into the local town as he's got a new tourist to bring out on safari. He arrives at the hotel and sits at the bar the night before, like usual, but the bartender serves him a lobster. Confused, he asks what's happening, and the bartender tells him a lady bought it for him. Derek turns in his seat to see Kate, who tells him she sold her apartment and bought a one-way ticket, and she just arrived after a very long journey. Unable to believe she's really come back, he says he hopes she's ready for another one, and sweeps her up in his arms, kissing her deeply, determined never to let her go again. 5 months later, Derek and Kate are married and living at the sanctuary together. It's time for them to release Manu back into the wild. Kate cries as she says goodbye to him, watching him run off and join the herd for good. Derek holds her and promises Manu will remember them, then takes her hand and leads her back home.